Imagine waking up to discover your mother is gone. No goodbye, no warning. Just blood on the front porch and an empty house. That is the reality Savannah Guthrie has lived with every single day since February 1st, 2026. And somewhere out there, the man responsible is still free. But not for long. Stay until the end of this video, because what the FBI profiler revealed about this abductor changes everything. You are welcome to the Crime Cabinet channel. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, a quiet woman living in Tucson, Arizona. The mother of Today Show co-host Savannah Guthrie. Her neighborhood was calm. Her home was familiar. Nothing about her daily life suggested that danger was coming. But someone had been watching. In the early hours of February 1st, 2026, a masked man armed with a handgun appeared at Nancy's front door. He wore gloves, long sleeves, and a black Ozark Trail backpack. He moved with purpose, and before the sun rose over Tucson, Nancy Guthrie was gone. Authorities believe she was taken from her home in the middle of the night. Blood was visible on the stone walkway outside her front door, evidence that she did not simply disappear. There had been a struggle. When deputies arrived the next morning, the Nest doorbell camera had been physically removed from its mount. Whoever this man was, he knew the camera was there. He had tried to silence it. What he did not know was that the FBI and Google would recover the footage anyway. That decision, to tamper with the camera rather than properly disable it, was the first of many mistakes this man would make. Savannah Guthrie later said publicly that she could not be at peace without answers, and that it was too much to bear to think her mother's abduction was connected to her own fame. And the man behind the mask had already started to leave a trail. Like this story, subscribe, share so more people know this case. The FBI released images recovered from Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera, showing a masked man wearing gloves and a holstered pistol on her porch. He was described as having an average build, standing approximately 5 feet 9 or 5 feet 10 inches tall. Investigators immediately began studying every frame. Although the suspect had clearly scouted the location in advance, he used foliage to block the camera lens, a crude, improvised method that no professional criminal would rely on. And in the process of reaching toward the camera, he may have exposed what appeared to be a tattoo on his wrist. That was mistake number 2. The backpack he carried was identified as a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a model sold exclusively at Walmart. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage at a Walmart location in Tucson, hoping to trace the purchase back to a specific individual. But the trail did not end there. Sheriff Chris Nanos later revealed that the backpack may have been purchased secondhand rather than directly from Walmart, shifting the investigation in a new direction entirely. A pair of black gloves was also recovered near the scene and sent for DNA testing. Additionally, DNA that did not belong to Nancy or anyone in close contact with her was collected from inside the residence, but the sample came from more than one person, making it difficult to isolate. Every clue pointed to someone who had planned the abduction, but not well enough. The FBI was building a picture, and retired profiler Jim Clemente was about to tell the world exactly who they were looking for. Like, watch, subscribe, share this story. 31 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished, renowned retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente sat down with journalist Brian Enton to give his honest assessment of the man behind the mask. His analysis was detailed and deeply unsettling. Clemente characterized the perpetrator as most likely a male in his 30s or 40s, not a professional criminal, not a seasoned operator, but someone driven by something deeply personal. He pointed to what he called forensic mistakes, leaving DNA at the scene, exposing parts of his body on camera, as clear evidence of limited criminal sophistication. A professional would never have made those errors. Clemente believed the suspect exhibited a significant degree of stress during the abduction. The footage itself revealed signs of anxiety. Rushed movements, improvised decisions, a man operating at the edge of his own capability. But what made this case different from a standard burglary or robbery was the sheer boldness of the act itself. Nancy was taken from an occupied home in the middle of the night, an act that required extreme motivation and a willingness to take enormous personal risk. This was not random. This was targeted. Clemente noted that the suspect may have had a history of fixating on celebrities or public figures, drawn not necessarily to Nancy herself, but to the family name and the fame attached to it. Alternatively, he suggested, the abductor could have had a direct but minor connection to the Guthrie household, perhaps someone who had previously worked on the property, a contractor or a handyman who had spent time inside those walls. Someone who knew the layout. Someone who knew the routine. The profile was chilling, and it pointed to a man hiding in plain sight. Like, subscribe, share this story. Most kidnappings follow a quiet, private pattern. The abductor contacts the family. Demands are made behind closed doors. Law enforcement is kept in the dark for as long as possible. This case was different from the start. A ransom note was sent directly to local television station KOLD, not to the Guthrie family privately, but to the media. It demanded payment in Bitcoin and set a deadline. Then a second note arrived. Both deadlines came and went, with no further contact, and no proof that Nancy was alive. The Guthrie family released a video offering to pay the ransom despite receiving no proof of life, a desperate act from a family running out of options. But FBI profiler Jim Clemente was deeply skeptical about those notes. He argued that sending ransom demands to a television station, rather than directly to the family, was not the behavior of someone focused on collecting money. A true kidnapper operating for financial gain keeps things private, controlled, and direct. Going to the media does the opposite. It invites attention, triggers a massive law enforcement response, and reduces any realistic chance of collecting a payout safely. To Clemente, that decision revealed something far more dangerous about this individual. The abductor wanted the world to know what he had done. He craved the coverage. He fed on the fear spreading across the nation. Investigators scrutinized the messages carefully, working to determine whether they were genuinely connected to the abduction, or whether someone unrelated was exploiting the situation for attention. Either possibility was alarming. The ransom notes had not brought Nancy home, but they had told investigators something critical about the mind of the man they were chasing. Like, subscribe, share this story. 100 days passed. Despite hundreds of sheriff's deputies, FBI agents, and volunteers dedicating enormous resources to the search, Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts remained completely unknown. The case had become one of the most talked about missing persons investigations in the country, and yet the man responsible remained free. Approximately 24 Pima County and FBI investigators continued actively working the case. 5 separate labs across the country were processing evidence. A private Florida lab had already sent a critical DNA sample to the FBI, which was now using advanced technology in an attempt to identify the kidnapper from genetic material left at the scene. But progress was slow and painful. The DNA sample recovered from the home came from more than one person, making isolation of a single suspect profile extraordinarily complex. Sheriff Nanos acknowledged it could take 6 additional months to fully untangle the strands. Critics had been vocal throughout the investigation, blaming law enforcement for a lack of visible progress, flooding social media with unverified theories, and in some cases, even pointing fingers at members of the Guthrie family. Law enforcement pushed back firmly, insisting the family was fully cooperative and that investigators were not operating in the dark. Sheriff Nanos said plainly, "There has been no sign of life, but there has also been no sign of death." Those words hung in the air like an open wound. On Mother's Day, Savannah Guthrie posted an emotional video montage of her mother through the decades, and captioned it simply, "Mother, daughter, sister, Noni, we miss you with every breath." Nancy was still out there, somewhere. Like, subscribe, share this story. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stood before reporters with a message he had repeated many times, but this time, his tone carried something heavier. "Every day we get closer," he said. "An arrest is inevitable." Those were strong words for a case that had produced no arrest and no confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie in over 3 months. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Investigators had identified a vehicle spotted on camera approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home on the night of the abduction. While that specific vehicle remained under close review, Sheriff Nanos confirmed that law enforcement was simultaneously analyzing hundreds of thousands of other vehicles captured on cameras across Tucson. The net was wide, but it was tightening. One late Friday night, law enforcement activity suddenly surged at a residential location near East Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue, roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home. Officers surrounded an SUV at a nearby restaurant and questioned a driver for several hours. No arrest was made that night, but something had drawn them there. The Guthrie family had raised the reward for information leading to Nancy's safe return to $1 million, a figure that reflected not just their desperation, but their absolute refusal to stop fighting. FBI profiler Jim Clemente had said from the beginning that the kidnapper's mistakes would eventually catch up with him. The DNA, the tattoo, the camera footage, the backpack, the ransom notes sent to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. Each error was a thread, and investigators were pulling every single one. Nancy Guthrie had been taken in the dark, but the truth, as it always does, was slowly moving toward the light. Like this story, subscribe for more updates on this case, share so the world keeps searching for Nancy. Follow this channel for the latest developments as this case continues to unfold. The man who scouted in silence. Long before the night of February 1st, someone had been studying Nancy Guthrie's home. The suspect was believed to have scouted the location in advance. He knew where the doorbell camera was positioned. He arrived with a plan to disable it, using foliage to block the lens before reaching up to physically remove the device from its mount. That level of preparation suggested patience. It suggested observation over a period of time. And it suggested that whoever this man was, he had stood close enough to that house, possibly on multiple occasions, without ever raising suspicion. Neighbors were interviewed. Streets were canvassed. Investigators asked a simple but critical question. Had anyone seen a stranger lingering near the Guthrie property in the days or weeks before the abduction? The desert neighborhood was quiet by nature. People came and went. A man walking slowly, watching, waiting, he could have blended in completely. Clemente noted that despite the advanced scouting, the suspect still resorted to improvised, ineffective methods on the night itself, suggesting that while he had observed the property, he had not fully accounted for every obstacle he would face. That gap between planning and execution told investigators something important. This was not a trained operative. This was someone who had convinced himself he was ready and then discovered, in the worst possible moment, that he was not. The gloves he wore that night were later found nearby and submitted for DNA testing. The backpack he carried had already been traced. The camera he tried to silence had already spoken. He had spent weeks preparing, and he had still left a trail broad enough for the FBI to follow. The question was not whether he would be found. The question was how much time remained. Like, subscribe, share this story. When deputies finally entered Nancy Guthrie's home on the morning of February 2nd, what they found told a story that no words could fully capture. Blood spatter on the front porch indicated that Nancy had been alive when the abduction took place. Retired FBI agent Jim Clemente analyzed the pattern carefully and concluded that she had coughed up blood with her face very close to the ground, a position consistent with someone being forcibly restrained or carried. She had fought. There was no question about that. Clemente stated that the blood evidence suggested only one person was carrying her at that point, not two, meaning the suspect may have acted alone during at least part of the abduction itself. Inside the residence, forensic teams worked methodically through every room. DNA that did not belong to Nancy or those in regular contact with her was recovered from within the home. The sample was complex, containing material from more than one individual, which significantly complicated the process of isolating a single suspect profile. As news of the investigation spread, something strange began happening at the property itself. Unidentified individuals and private citizens began appearing at the Guthrie residence, some carrying metal detectors, searching the grounds without any official authorization. Law enforcement was forced to manage not only an active investigation, but also the chaos of amateur sleuths convinced they could solve what the FBI could not. The crime scene had been difficult enough to preserve from the beginning. Sheriff Nanos himself admitted he would have handled certain aspects differently, including the decision to release the scene before federal investigators had conducted a fully exhaustive search. That admission cost credibility, but it also revealed the pressure law enforcement was operating under from the very first hours of this case. The question that haunted this case from the very beginning was deceptively simple. Why Nancy Guthrie? She was not a public figure herself. She did not hold political office. She had no known enemies. She lived a modest private life in a Tucson neighborhood, far removed from the glare of television cameras and red carpets. But her daughter was Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognizable faces on American morning television. Savannah herself grappled painfully with that connection. In her first public interview after her mother's disappearance, she told former co-host Hoda Kotb that she could not stop thinking about whether her own fame had made her mother a target. "It's too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside," she said. FBI profiler Jim Clemente took that theory seriously. He suggested the abductor may have developed a fixation, not necessarily on Savannah directly, but on the world she represented. Fame, wealth, attention, power. Some individuals, Clemente explained, become consumed by celebrity culture in ways that warp their sense of reality. They begin to believe that famous families owe them something, that proximity to fame is a right they have been unfairly denied. For such a person, taking Nancy Guthrie was not just a crime, it was a statement. Alternatively, Clemente raised a second possibility, that the abductor had a more tangible, practical connection to the household. A contractor, a repair worker, someone who had been inside that home and had used that access to map every detail, every camera, every routine. Investigators urged anyone with information to contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI directly, because the answer to why Nancy might be sitting in someone's memory right now, unrecognized for what it truly is. When the first ransom note arrived at the newsroom of Tucson television station KOLD, editors immediately contacted law enforcement. The note demanded payment in Bitcoin. It set a deadline, and it had been sent not to Nancy's family, but to a television station. A second note followed shortly after. Two separate deadlines mentioned across both communications came and went with no further contact, no proof of life, and no indication that the sender was genuinely in a position to negotiate. The Guthrie family, unwilling to give up any chance of bringing Nancy home, released a public video offering to pay the ransom, even without receiving any confirmation that she was still alive. That moment, a family pleading on camera, offering money into a void, became one of the most emotionally devastating images of the entire case. But Jim Clemente was not convinced the notes were what they appeared to be. His argument was straightforward. A kidnapper genuinely motivated by financial gain operates in the shadows. Every additional person who knows about the abduction increases the risk of arrest and reduces the chance of collecting safely. Sending demands to a media outlet does the exact opposite. It guarantees massive publicity, immediate law enforcement escalation, and a national spotlight that no serious criminal would want. To Clemente, the decision to go public pointed directly to motive. This individual wanted recognition. He wanted to watch the Guthrie family suffer openly. He wanted the country talking about what he had done. Investigators worked carefully to determine whether the notes came from the actual abductor or from someone exploiting the situation, a distinction that carried enormous consequences for how the case would proceed. The Bitcoin was never paid, Nancy was never returned, and the notes raised more questions than they answered. In a city like Tucson, cameras are everywhere. Traffic intersections, petrol stations, car parks, private driveways, bus routes. Every lens captures a slice of movement, a timestamp, a direction, a partial plate number. For investigators hunting a kidnapper who had vanished into the desert night, that network of cameras became the most important tool they had. A specific vehicle had been spotted on camera, approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of the abduction. That vehicle was placed under active review, but Sheriff Nanos was careful to emphasize that investigators were simultaneously analyzing hundreds of thousands of other vehicles captured across the wider Tucson area. The scale of that undertaking was staggering. Frame by frame, analysts worked through hours of footage, looking for a vehicle that matched, a route that made sense, a face that appeared too many times in too many places near the Guthrie home in the days before February 1st. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst John Miller put the challenge into perspective, noting that while the abundance of modern cameras gives the public the impression that crimes can be solved within days, investigators in this case were working in a desert, where coverage had significant gaps and digital trails went cold without warning. The late Friday night surge of law enforcement activity near East Orange Grove Road had briefly raised hopes. An SUV was surrounded at a nearby restaurant. A driver was questioned for hours. The scene drew significant attention, but no arrest followed. Each near breakthrough that ended without resolution added to the weight the investigation carried. But every vehicle reviewed, every camera frame analyzed, every digital record pulled was another thread being followed. Investigators had not stopped. They had not walked away. They were still watching every road that led out of Tucson that night. Through 100 days of uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions, the Guthrie family did something remarkable. They stayed visible, they stayed vocal, and they refused to let the world forget. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released several emotional video statements pleading for their mother's safe return. They urged the public to share any information that might help, however small, however seemingly insignificant. The family raised the reward for information, leading to Nancy's safe return to $1 million, a number that spoke not only to their resources, but to their absolute determination to bring her home. On Mother's Day, Savannah posted a 45-second video montage of her mother through the decades. As a young mother raising 3 small children, laughing, living, loving. The caption read simply, "Mother, daughter, sister, Noni, we miss you with every breath." The video was set to a song called "May You Find a Light" by the Brilliants. In one brief clip, within that montage, Nancy Guthrie looked directly into the camera and said 2 words, "Miss you." The timing felt unbearable. Despite vocal critics who had spent weeks second-guessing investigators, spreading unverified theories online, and in some cases, falsely implicating family members, law enforcement sources involved in the case pushed back firmly, describing the Guthrie family as fully cooperative and deeply committed to finding the truth. The investigation pressed forward. The DNA labs continued their work. The camera footage continued to be analyzed. The leads continued to be chased across the desert. Nancy Guthrie had been a quiet woman living a quiet life until someone decided her family's name made her a target. Her family was not quiet anymore, and neither was the nation watching alongside them. Like this story, subscribe for continued coverage, share so Nancy is never forgotten. This case remains open. Anyone with information is urged to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900.